The next item is Bill 23-171, Minor Consent for Vaccinations, Amendment Act of 2020. Councilmember Gray.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there discussion on the measure?
Yes, Chairman.
Councilmember Trayon White.
So I want to thank Councilman Gray and his diligence on this bill. I have reevaluated my initial support for this legislation. For the record, I have spoke to Councilman Gray. We are setting up some meetings with other council members, including industry experts, to discuss the bill. However, parents have a fundamental right to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children. This bill, which is the Minor Consent for Vaccination Amendment Act of 2020, the Supreme Court has entrenched history of protecting the fundamental rights of parenting regarding their children. A government must prove that infringement on the parent's liberty is essential to fulfillment of compelling interests and is the least restrictive means of fulfilling this state interest. I'm not convinced of this high standard is met in this legislation. I'm a parent, and hearing from other parents, it's hard to imagine a child as young as 11 years old. I have a 12-year-old making decisions regarding vaccinations that could impact them for years to come. And even if the child is capable of meeting the requirements for the informed consent standards in the legislation, the scientific evidence that the physical, mental, and emotional development of a child that young, including the pre-adolescence, varies, and is often not sufficient enough for a child to make well-reasoned decisions about risk-taking involvement their health and well-being. Additionally, this legislation does not equally permit the child to use the same application of their comprehensive risks and benefits to refuse a vaccination that their parents have previously chosen for their child to receive. But consenting to a vaccine and to consent to for a child alone is acknowledged they have abdicated their constitutional right to a trial by jury should they become injured is a highly questionable occurrence that may lead to profound legal effects as a result of them consenting to this vaccination. Medical practitioners, schools, and others should not be permitted to or coerce impressionable minors into medical procedures that is capable of causing injury or death behind their parents' back. Unlike medical, school, and other personnel administering vaccines, parents are legally accountable for the healthcare and education of a minor child when that child is experiencing a vaccine reaction or becomes chronically ill or disabled. Additionally, the U.S. Federal Vaccine Injury Compensation Program has awarded more than $4 billion to vaccine victims since 1988, and 2 or 3 vaccines injured plaintiffs are turned away without financial reports. In conclusion, I understand the majority of council members may support this bill as of right now, and I cannot do so in good conscience, given consent in the bill as early as 11 years old. And I already talked about Councilmember Gray and I have agreed to meet to discuss the bills with some medical professionals. So I will be voting no as related to this bill, but look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Not that I want to provoke a debate, but I want the record to reflect a contrary view, and that is that I think that public health can very much be in the public interest, and that is have a compelling state interest. And we see that today with the pandemic and the need for, because of public health, to alter certain behaviors. That's how important public health is. I think there's a compelling state interest there. And I would also say or note that vaccines, the kinds of vaccines that are authorized under this legislation are vaccines that have been deemed safe and reliable through the drug approval process. It includes the Federal Drug Administration. I think those are very important criteria. We're not talking about just any medical procedure, but we're talking about vaccines that have gone through a rigorous process. And we're seeing that as well today, both in the measles epidemic and the COVID pandemic. Is there any further discussion regarding this legislation? Councilmember Che?
Yes, thank you very much. I was not going to prolong this either, but I think you're correct. The statements made by Ward 8 council member probably shouldn't stand unrebutted. I do know a little bit about Supreme Court rulings, compelling justifications, and things of that nature. And vaccines have routinely been upheld as something available to both parents and children and to the larger community. Because what we seem to forget sometimes, especially the people who oppose these things, they believe that it's just their choice. The fact of the matter is a child needs to be protected against the dangers of things like measles, other diseases that cause death, and the community needs to be protected so that diseases that were once thought to be eliminated are not coming back, which is what we're finding around the world. So the idea that somehow this is not compelling is a mistake. And also, I want to underline the fact that when we're talking about children, minors, we're talking about a floor of an age. They still have to meet the gatekeeper, the physician, it has to meet a judgment that the minor is capable of informed consent. So again, just to make sure that the statements that were made earlier are not left there unrebutted. Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Che.
Chairman.
Councilmember Gray.
I want to appreciate the comments that were made by Councilmember Che in particular. I've talked with her about it, and I'm going to follow up in the immediate aftermath of this session today with Councilmember Trayon White and the folks that we worked with to get to the point that we got to on the legislation and that she got to as well. You know, there's no question that there's a rigorous process that's engaged in order to get to informed consent. There's nothing frivolous about it. You know, one can look at having reached informed consent in other situations. I know that it's still on the minds of a number of people, even though it was many years ago. There's a whole issue with the Tuskegee experiment, and we certainly don't ever want to have anything like that again. But I just don't see any possibility that the legislation that we're engaged in now and the work that's gone on that led up to this point, we could ever possibly have that kind of situation once again. So I'm comfortable with where we are with the legislation. I again want to thank Councilmember Che for her work, and I will look forward to Councilmember Trayon while we're following up with you to make sure that we have the meeting that we've talked about. So hopefully at the end of that conversation, you will feel more comfortable than you felt up to this point.
Chairman.
Let me just see if anybody else wants to speak.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McDuffie.
Just one sort of practical question. You know, I know everybody's seeking not to prolong this, but I think, you know, Councilmember raises some really important issues, this measure. And just practically speaking, I know there's a number of things that are in the bill in terms of confidentiality and so forth, but like, you know, practically speaking, this measure helps to protect young folks in instances where perhaps their parents, for whatever reason, religious or otherwise, would not consent to a vaccination. But is there some potential concern, or how might, you know, Councilmember Gray or Che respond, you know, if a parent finds out that a kid was vaccinated against, you know, their decision? I mean, there are potential implications for that, right? I mean, this measure would help to protect kids and their health and folks who might come in contact with those kids. On the other hand, does it protect the kid at home? You know, if a parent finds out that they did this against their will. I'm sure you all have thought about this, and I'd love to hear how you might respond to that.
Mr. Gray, do you want to?
Let me ask Councilmember Che if she would weigh in on this because she's had, you know, considerable experience with issues like this, given, you know, her work as a law professor and given her work on the bill to this point. So, Councilmember Che, let me ask you to weigh in on this around Councilmember McDuffie's question that he posed.
Sure. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that the bill includes many protections so that the confidentiality and privacy of the minor's actions are maintained. But Councilmember McDuffie wants to know, well, what if the parents find out? What, you know, what kind of trouble might the minor get into? This is the risk, I would just add, of any minor access laws, whether it be pregnancy, abortion, sexually transmitted diseases, treatment, any of those things. And the reporting and updating of forms and that sort of thing, all of them are under the law meant to protect the minor. But should the minor parents learn of this and then act against the minor, it's like any other risk that minors have when their parents, you know, react. So that this is no different. You know, as I said, pregnancy, treatment for STDs, any of those things. So it's within that whole realm. There's I think a rigorous effort to protect, but should it happen, then that is a risk, and parents, of course, are not entitled to abuse their children.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure what my time looks like, but do those other examples that you raise, pregnancy, STDs, what's the age with respect to those types of things, and how young do we allow the individual consent of minors in those instances?
I'm not sure of each and every one. Some do not have any. Some have 12s, you know, and different states have different ages like that. I guess it depends upon when you might be subject to them. I believe with the STDs, it might be 11. And I think that may be the basis on which Councilmember Gray put that number in there. But remember, and I really want to emphasize this, that's a floor, okay? That doesn't mean that if a child reaches that age that one can automatically get a vaccine. First of all, the vaccine has to be on the approved safe list of the CDC. And second of all, the physician has to make a judgment about whether that you could have a 14-year-old who a physician could conclude is not in a position to make to give informed consent. So that's the real determinant here, and which is why I take it that Councilmember Gray works so closely with the Medical Society on this point. So,
Councilmember Allen, you wanted to be recognized?
Thank you. Yeah, I had not really planned on speaking on this, but I do feel like, given the debate, that it's important that we have a robust record that speaks about why this is so important. Like I've heard some of my colleagues say, I mean, and let me just put my public health hat on. I mean, what we're talking about is making sure that we take the steps necessary and we have the rules and laws set up in a way that we are using vaccines in a way that keep not only individuals safe, but keep families, neighborhoods, and communities safe. That is the whole point of public health. I think that, as I've heard my colleagues state, we lay out within the law the ways in which those vaccines have to be on that safe list, where healthcare providers have to play a role in the decision-making as well to make sure that young person is making the right decision. And I know in previous pieces of legislation that have related to young people, you know, we've worked on things such as not having it show up on a family insurance policy, for example, to try to help protect that young person. You know, so there's steps that we can take in a way that address, as I heard Mr. McDuffie talking about, what concern, you know, how would we make sure we're protecting if that young person perhaps is taking a step that their parents or guardians don't exercise, but they know it's in their own best health, and so they're trying to take that step. And I'll note, I mean, it wasn't but a couple of months ago, this council recognized the importance of that young person being empowered for their own health and safety and rights. We lowered the age for SAVRA, which is our survivors of sexual violence, where we lower the age to 13, so that young people who have experienced sexual violence are able to have rights that they can take on their own without having to rely on a parent, and can even do separate from the parent. So we recognized that young person's rights and abilities to take those steps for themselves when it comes to their health and safety. So I just want to make sure that I kind of put my public health hat back on and just kind of really make sure that the record is clear about how important something like this is, who it is geared toward is protecting young people, but that using vaccines are a way that we not only keep individuals safe, but we keep communities safe. And we certainly are going to be having a conversation sometime next year when there's another vaccine that's going to be critically important, that's going to see widespread distribution. And we're going to want to make sure that that we're taking the right steps. So anyway, I just want to make sure I was on the record with that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. If there's no more first round, second round would be Councilmember Trayon White.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to note that during the rebuttal, there has been comments about the Center for Disease Control having stamped these said vaccinations. For me, it's not an issue of the vaccination. It's an issue of the council voting to circumvent the inclusion of a parent making the decision about their child. You know, and the floor is an 11-year-old. I have a 12-year-old son who just can barely put together a 5-page paper or finish his homework on time or be up late at night playing Fortnite, making decisions about his health. And so for us to circumvent that process is very worrisome for me. And that's why I stand as relates to this said legislation as we attempt to use the law to remove parental involvement as relates to an important decision made by a minor as young as 11 years old.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion on this bill, we have the bill before us. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson?
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie? Seems like we've lost him. Councilmember Pinto?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau?
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Silverman?
Yes.
Councilmember Silverman votes yes. Councilmember Todd?
Yes.
Councilmember Todd votes yes. Councilmember Robert White?
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White?
No.
Councilmember Trayon White votes no. Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds?
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Che?
Yes.
Councilmember Che votes yes. Councilmember Gray?
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Grasso?
Yes.
Councilmember Grasso votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie?
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 no.
The measure is approved. The next item is non-consent agenda. And the first